Look at the Canada-US relationship under President Trump is obviously one that's been strained.
On his European tour, the Prime Minister offers a preview of major spending to come with an eye to opening up new markets.
When Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canadian goods outside of CUSMA to 35%, it looked like a punishing blow. Lumber, steel, aluminum, and manufactured products were all hit with costs that threatened jobs and strained supply chains. Many sectors in Canada felt the shock immediately. Yet one sector stood apart: energy, from oil and gas to electricity. Uranium and the emerging promise of liquefied natural gas remained largely untouched. This reality has become Canada's shield in the middle of Trump's trade war. And it is not just protection, it is the foundation for a counter-strategy that shows Canada is not simply enduring American pressure, but preparing to turn it into leverage.
Our government is in the process of unleashing $500 billion of investment in energy infrastructure, port infrastructure.
Canada is the largest energy supplier to the United States. In 2024, according to Natural Resources Canada, exports included nearly 4 million barrels of crude oil per day, about 8.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas each day, and more than 11 terawatt-hours of electricity over the year. Canada also provided 27% of U.S. uranium imports, the single largest source. These flows are not optional. They are part of the backbone of the U.S. economy and critical to industries that cannot operate without them. Trump can raise tariffs on Canadian metals or manufactured goods, but shutting off oil from Alberta or uranium from Saskatchewan would risk blackouts, fuel shortages, and national security concerns in the United States. This dependency is structural. It gives Ottawa quiet but powerful leverage because Trump's tariff weapons lose their bite when applied to resources America cannot replace. That leverage is rarely shouted about in Ottawa, yet it is always present in the background of negotiations in Washington.
Expansions of the Port of Montreal, its operators say, would bring in $140 million per year, and of northern Manitoba's Port of Churchill to get liquefied natural gas to overseas markets.
Beyond oil, gas, and uranium, Canada is moving to add another card to its hand. Liquefied natural gas was once dismissed. Only 3 years ago, Justin Trudeau said there was no business case to ship Canadian LNG across the Atlantic. That position has now been abandoned. Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced plans for $500 billion in energy and port infrastructure investments. Central to this package are expansions at the Port of Montreal and the Port of Churchill in northern Manitoba. Montreal already handles critical mineral shipments and could generate $140 million per year once expanded. Churchill, sitting on Hudson Bay, is being positioned as a gateway for LNG to overseas markets. The logic is clear. Europe is desperate to reduce its reliance on Russian gas. Canada, with vast reserves and political stability, is well placed to supply part of that demand. Carney has said his phone blew up with interest from investors as soon as the plan was signaled. Businesses read it as a policy shift with teeth. The creation of a major projects office by Labor Day is intended to fast-track approvals and coordinate environmental reviews with provinces and territories. For Canada, LNG is no longer an afterthought. It is an arsenal being built in direct response to the pressure created by Trump's tariffs. Trump believes tariffs can bend allies to his will. For Canada, those tariffs have been painful in certain sectors, but they have also forced a national reckoning. By doubling down on energy and by opening new channels for LNG exports, Ottawa is reducing its exposure to the U.S. market while strengthening ties with Europe. Oil, gas, uranium, electricity, and now LNG together form a foundation of leverage that no tariff can erase. Trump may be writing the rules of the tariff war, but Canada is writing a new playbook in energy. What began as a shield against American pressure is now becoming a weapon of strategy. Far from being cornered, Canada is showing it can turn a storm of tariffs into an opportunity to redefine its role on the global stage.
Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone today, weeks after blowing past the August 1st deadline for a trade deal.
The leaders discussed current trade challenges, opportunities, and shared priorities in a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the U.S. The leaders
After weeks of silence, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump finally spoke by phone. Ottawa described the conversation as substantive and productive, focused on trade challenges, new economic priorities, and Ukraine. Washington gave no statement, reinforcing the sense of imbalance. Still, the fact that they spoke matters. It was the first contact since Trump's August 1st deadline passed without a deal, triggering a 35% tariff on Canadian goods outside CUSMA and a 50% duty on steel and aluminum. The call comes as Trump pushes a disruptive style of negotiation. Earlier this month, the United States extended 50% tariffs not only on metals, but on more than 400 industrial products containing steel, from cranes to rail cars, even though these items were nominally covered under CUSMA. The message was unmistakable. Trump is willing to stretch rules and keep the threat of leaving CUSMA on the table. But tariffs bring costs at home. Walmart recently warned of higher prices feeding through supply chains. In April, the Yale Budget Lab estimated that the 2025 tariff package would raise U.S. consumer prices by 2.3%, equal to about $3,800 per household using 2024 prices. In July, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco projected that if tariffs remain high, U.S. real incomes could decline by about 0.4% by 2028. The Center for Automotive Research in Michigan also cautioned that a 25% tariff on autos and parts could add $108 billion to industry costs this year. These figures show that disruption abroad is also a strain at home. For Canada, the challenge is immense, but it is not helpless. Carney has resisted calls to match Trump's every move, choosing instead a strategy of patience while holding on to powerful cards. Energy remains the most obvious. In 2024, Canada exported close to 4 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States, by far America's largest source of imports. Natural gas shipments were more than 8 billion cubic feet per day, and Canada supplied roughly 27% of all uranium used in U.S. nuclear power plants. These are dependencies that Washington cannot easily replace. Canada also holds an advantage in critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements mined north of the border are essential for electric vehicles and defense supply chains. And despite the new tariffs, about 85% of bilateral trade still moves duty-free under CUSMA, giving Canadian exporters a core of stability while disputes play out. Ottawa has also been selective in retaliation. In March, it applied 25% tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of American goods, targeting consumer products like beverages, food items, and motorcycles, pressure points designed to hit politically sensitive constituencies in the United States.
The readout also says Carney and Trump agreed to talk again soon.
Looking forward, 3 paths are possible. One is a framework similar to those signed with the UK, Japan, and South Korea, where tariffs were capped around 10 to 15% in exchange for investment pledges and purchases. Another is for Canada to use energy and minerals more directly in talks, offering stable access in return for tariff relief. A third is legal and structural, from pursuing cases under CUSMA and the WTO to diversifying exports toward Europe and Asia. None of these paths guarantee immediate relief, but they underline that Canada is not without leverage. Trump remains central, but Carney has shown he will not rush into a bad deal. The recent call did not solve the trade standoff, yet it marked the beginning of the next phase, where endurance and strategy will decide how North America's 2 closest partners manage one of their most volatile economic relationships in decades.
America is the country that started the AI race, and as President of the United States, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it.
When it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power hungry than the data centers we are used to since the internet age.
After August 1st, negotiations with China and Canada remained at a standstill. And Trump's latest tariff moves are now colliding with America's rising demand for energy and critical minerals to fuel its AI and manufacturing ambitions. Behind those headlines is a reality Trump can't afford to overlook. The United States relies heavily on Canadian supply, and in the race to lead in AI and semiconductor production, losing that connection would hurt Washington far more than Ottawa.
I think the biggest concern, and the one that the industry itself really needs to address, is the energy usage. That is just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They've got to find a better way of providing that energy.
Trump's latest tariff push is now colliding with America's surging demand for energy, the same power needed to fuel AI data centers and bring semiconductor manufacturing back home. His proposal for a 100% tariff on imported chips is designed to pressure companies into building or investing in U.S. facilities. Apple, for example, pledged $100 billion in new American projects. That kind of industrial build-out comes with a hidden cost: electricity. In Virginia, home to the largest data center market in the world, Dominion Energy projects that demand could double over the next 15 years. AI data centers alone can draw more than a gigawatt on a single campus. And Virginia is only one example. Across the United States, from Oregon's server farms to Texas's tech corridors, AI data centers are multiplying, each requiring massive and continuous power. Furthermore, bringing semiconductor fabrication home will add to the load. All of it depends on reliable, large-scale energy supply. And that's where Canada's role becomes unavoidable.
So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas. It also means more exports, without question.
Canada is already America's largest energy supplier. According to 2024 trade data, the U.S. imported roughly 3.8 to 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil per day. Natural gas imports from Canada averaged about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, up 7% from the year before. Electricity flows across the border totaled about 11.4 terawatt hours, enough to power roughly 1 million U.S. homes for a year. Uranium from Canada made up around 27% of total U.S. imports, the largest share of any country, sustaining a big part of America's nuclear fleet. On top of that are critical minerals.
We bring as interlocutors here all of the critical minerals of Ontario. So, for example, nickel. Nickel is something that comes from Ontario. It's high grade and it's not replaceable from other places in the world.
Ontario's high-grade nickel has no domestic substitute in the U.S. for certain defense and battery applications. British Columbia's germanium is essential for fiber optics, solar panels, and night vision systems. And the Teck smelter in Trail is the only Canadian source. These are not commodities that can be swapped in from other suppliers without years of supply chain adjustments. If these flows were disrupted, the ripple effects would be immediate. Industrial plants, data centers, and chip fabs would face higher costs and possible delays, and replacing Canada's unique mix of proximity, scale, and stability would be extremely difficult.
We can be an energy superpower. We have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of competitiveness.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen not to rush into a deal. His strategy is to keep dialogue open, but refuse terms that would weaken Canada's long-term position. He's accelerating investment in domestic extraction and processing of energy and minerals, and reinforcing Canada's value to allies beyond North America. By signaling readiness to cooperate, but also the capacity to stand alone, Carney is making clear that Canada is not cornered. The message to Washington is that Canada's resources are a shared strength, but only if the partnership is respected. Pushing too far could backfire. Without Canadian energy and minerals, U.S. industries risk higher costs, slower growth, and greater dependence on less reliable partners, a dangerous prospect for an administration promising a manufacturing revival and AI leadership. In this mutual dependency, Canada holds leverage that matters more to U.S. stability than the other way around, and Trump must decide whether the price of sidelining Canada is worth any gains at the table.